It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week, in partnership with the Daily Beast, Christopher Dickey, foreign editor, is with us. How are you, sir?
Happy to be here, as always.
Happy to welcome you. Happy to welcome as well Marc Basset's Paris bureau chief of Spanish daily newspaper El País.
Thank you.
Busy week?
Yeah, it's quite busy.
Quite busy. Okay. Was it quite busy for Christina Okello
It was
of
very busy.
sister station Radio France
Yes.
International? How
Our Vanguard service also launched its new reform this week, so we've had a lot of stuff to learn, a lot of video reporting to do. So as well as covering the news, we've also been learning new skills and techniques. So I'll tell you all about
that's
that
over
later.
the English service
Yes.
of Radio France International. And we welcome back, as always, Gregory Viscusi of Bloomberg News. You're saying it's been all about...
It's been very busy. Carlos Ghosn. Carlos Ghosn is a big
and we'll
story.
talk about Carlos
big
Ghosn.
story.
We'll keep you busy later. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. We forgot about Gibraltar, Spain's prime minister, who's on a visit to Cuba ahead of this coming Sunday's summit in Brussels to ratify that draft divorce deal with Britain, insists he won't sign if the status of the disputed territory isn't treated separately from the rest. Gibraltar, which we must admit had failed to rate in the astounding soap opera that is Brexit, had failed to rate up until now.
Last night I spoke to the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, and I'm confident that on Sunday we'll be able to agree a deal that delivers for the whole UK family, including Gibraltar.
Since that Thursday statement outside Downing Street, Pedro Sanchez has weighed in over Twitter. And, he's saying he's not ready yet to sign on the dotted line. If there are no changes, we will veto Brexit. Of course, Marc Basset, it's not quite a veto because you don't need unanimity on Sunday, but they would like everyone to be able to sign.
Exactly. Technically, I think you don't need a veto, but what impression would you give to have
Are
a
you
divided?
surprised that Gibraltar suddenly comes up now?
I'm surprised, and I'm not surprised. I'm surprised because it didn't come up until now, since the negotiations started. But you have to take into account that Gibraltar, even if it's a tiny piece of land in the southern Iberian Peninsula.
You were going to say southern Spain. I know that's what you were going to say.
Yes. So it's a vital interest for Spain. It's a question of sovereignty. Spain has reclaimed sovereignty for a long time with Gibraltar. And Gibraltar always, when there is something between the UK and Spain, the UK and Europe, at the end, it always comes up, you know?
Yeah, let's hear how they're talking about it. Who can forget, after all, the Treaty of Utrecht? The Spanish, it dates back to 1713.
We do not recognize Gibraltar as part of the United Kingdom. We assume it is the UK who should represent Gibraltar, but it is not part of the United Kingdom. This is a colonial situation that Spain will not permit. We are not going to accept the European Commission imposing a relationship between us and this colony.
And this colony, Christopher Dickey.
Well, look, all over the world there are what used to be called imperial confetti of these great colonial powers like France and Great Britain. Why are the Malvinas or the Falklands, why are they part of Great Britain? Why is Gibraltar part of Great Britain? It does go back to treaties in the 18th century, in the 17th century. And I think, there's been a lot of desire to rethink those by lots of different countries in different times. With Europe, when there was a united Europe, before people were trying to tear apart the European Union, all of that could be covered up. I mean, we're all part of Europe, so it doesn't matter quite as much the status of Gibraltar. Once Britain wants to pull out of Europe, then Gibraltar becomes a real issue. Where does it belong? What is it part of? In fact, physically, clearly, it's part of the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the inhabitants there want to be British. I mean, that's been clear in sort of vote after vote. Same in the Malvinas. So,
And
you
they
can't
voted,
for-
you mean the overwhelmingly to remain.
They voted to remain in the EU, but not to become part of
And
Spain.
96% voted to remain in the EU.
But that's true. Well, it wasn't 96% in Scotland, but that doesn't mean that Scotland wants to be. But it was pretty big in Scotland too. It doesn't mean Scotland wants to be.
In fact,
hyped off and
Scotland may
given
be
to
more
another country.
inclined to break away from Britain than
Maybe now.
Gibraltar is.
I'm British. I'd be really upset that I wouldn't be able to travel to Gibraltar as easily as before. I mean, I think personally Brexit is a big mistake, but that's not the issue here. Gibraltar's a beautiful place. It's got great botanic animal life. I went there, I think, 5 years ago. Got a great reception from the tourists, from not just tourists, but locals, and even monkeys. There's monkeys everywhere when you climb up at the top of the mountains. They're there. They
The
say
apes, yeah,
baboons. Yeah. So it's, I think the whole issue, the rift, it's Europe is falling apart.
I don't want to be a little bit, how should we say, cynical, but we do have to talk about the timing of all of this because apparently in nearby Andalusia, there are regional elections coming up. Is this about that?
Okay, it might have some impact because Gibraltar, it's in the southern part of the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and of Andalusia. So if it belonged to Spain, if it ever belonged to Spain, it would be part of Andalusia.
So this is grandstanding?
It may have an impact. Also, it may have an impact that Pedro Sanchez, the current prime minister, is center-left, and he's under a lot of pressure of the Spanish right, which likes to do a big fuss about nationalistic issues. But I think that there is also a technical issue. The Spanish government says it thought that it was solved in the agreement that was being negotiated by the European Commission with the UK. And when the agreement was presented to Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, it discovered the wording was not as the Spanish thought it would be, So this is why they reopened this case. It's not a question of today, of sovereignty. Spain is not claiming to have the sovereignty over Gibraltar, but of having the final say in any negotiation or dealing in the future with Gibraltar.
And there's always last-minute jockeying whenever the EU signs anything important. Fishing, the French and
Fishing,
the
I was
Dutch.
going to say fishing is the other one that could hold up an agreement Saturday. I mean, there's a summit. Sorry, Sunday. There's a summit Sunday in Brussels, as you know. Supposed to just be to sign this accord. The schedule calls for the meeting to end at noon. So I mean, the general thinking is that either they're all in agreement and it's over by noon, in fact, or else they're going to haggle over Gibraltar and fishing, and we're going to be there till midnight. So one or the other.
After Sunday, the attention will turn squarely back to Britain and Theresa May's, shall we say, long shot bid to win a majority in Parliament for the deal. Matt in the Daily Telegraph playing on Theresa May's long used and now discarded mantra that no deal is better than a bad deal. Here it's a bad deal is better than no deal. It's been turned around. Now, that divorce deal, because there's two parts to this. It's important to point it out. The divorce deal looks final. It's the political statement that comes with it. It was originally 7 pages long. It's been fleshed out to give UK lawmakers a sense of what they negotiate when we graduate to phase 2, the post-Brexit relationship with the continent. The floor goes to the right honourable gentleman from Islington North.
19 extra pages, but nothing has changed. The only certainty contained within these pages is that the transition period will have to be extended, or we will end up with a backstop and no exit.
Christopher Dickey.
Well, it's a process that looks like it's just going to go on and on and on. And you know how much I love this process.
We all do. But I think I'm surprised that Theresa May has even lasted this long. I mean, I think, as a woman, she's a real inspiration. I mean, you either love, you can love her, you can hate her, but, you have to give her credit for being able to stick at it. She has really proven her mettle and what she's worth. And
BBC reporter earlier telling her some people want to hug you and others want to shake you.
Yeah, but she does it with finesse and style. I mean, if you've seen her shoes, every time she gets up in front of Downing Street, she's well dressed and she gives it. She sells her pitch well. I mean, we still don't know whether or not Brexit will
So she could still it could still pass mustard at Westminster?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't rule her out. I mean, her opponents like Boris Johnson have tried to desperately oust her, and she's still standing. So it's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she looks solid, but she looks. Actually, that BBC interview you mentioned, I mean, the video of it is phenomenal. She looks like she's going to a party. She looks ecstatic.
Yeah.
So I guess she thinks that she's going to survive at the very least.
Yeah.
Mark Bassett, what does your crystal ball tell you?
We should look at her rivals, and perhaps that's why she looks so good in this situation.
Because they look so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, she seems to have survived the challenge from within her party. They had to get 48 votes from
Yeah.
within her party to overthrow. They didn't get that, so
On
she
Tuesday, they
survived.
threw in the towel.
Yeah, so she survived that step.
Yeah.
The numbers just aren't there. The problem is it's a minority government. The Northern Irish people are not going to, the Northern Ireland small group that she relies on for support are probably not going to vote for her because they don't like the way Northern Ireland's treated in this thing. There's probably enough Europhile Tories, there are a few Europhile Tories who will vote against it, and then it depends what Labour does. And that's going to have to do with sort of political jockeying. It's not going to have to do with what their views of Brexit are. It's going to have to do with what sort of political calculations they
Although
can make.
Corbyn is not is in favor of Brexit, basically.
Officially, he's not. In fact,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
is.
Officially, he's
he's
not,
not.
but
But
in fact, he is.
in all, for all intents and purposes, he is.
For all intents and purposes, he is, but
His party's not. No.
His party is not, and there seems to be this coalescing movement that goes from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party that is pushing more and more for that second referendum that seems like a long shot, and now you have to wonder about that.
Well, I think procedurally it's still very hard to do. I mean,
But why? The first one wasn't binding. I've never understood what the hang-up is about a second referendum. Like,
Because I
when
think
we elect people, you have a right to vote them out. You know, it's like you can
58
change.
What was it? 58%, 42%,
52-40.
52-40. So 52% of British voters voted against, voted yes to Brexit. So it's a binding.
It wasn't binding, but it wasn't. It was officially was not. It was a consultation. It was not binding.
But I think it was. We see now that it was a clear case of a referendum where one of the options could not be applied, really. Because how do you apply Brexit? I think all the mess that we are in is a demonstration.
Because no
that-
one thought that would actually go through. Everyone was surprised.
well,
the day
but this,
after,
but why Cameron, the prime minister at the time, was such an idiot that he wanted to do this in the first place is a huge question, because referendums are never really about the thing the referendum is about. Referendums are always basically a popularity contest for the
that
ruling
was it.
party.
He wanted to shore up his
But
popularity.
he got his way with the Scottish referendum.
Well, yes, lucky for him, I guess. But that was a different situation.
Because that was contained to one area. It wasn't. It couldn't be turned into a yes or no vote on the national government because it was only in one region.
Yeah.
One final
Also,
point.
let's not forget all the lying that went on by the Brexiteers.
Yeah.
And some exaggerating by the Remain people too.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, Greg.
There was some massive exaggerations on both sides.
One final point on this. You mentioned it, which is the DUP. The Northern Irish Unionist Party that props up Theresa May's government. It's got 10 seats at Westminster. And this week it started abstaining on votes. It's holding its party conference this weekend. And we're going to see both parts of the Conservative Party represented, because there's going to be Philip Hammond there, who's got Theresa May's ointment. And we're going to see Boris Johnson, who's her rival, showing up at that DUP conference. Mark Bassett, Spain's foreign minister, putting a bit of fuel on the fire this week when he said he thought there was a better chance of having an independent Scotland before a breakup, of the UK before a breakup of Spain, and sort of giving a tacit endorsement for Scotland to join the EU afterward.
Well, that's interesting because first the Spanish government was never very enthusiastic about the Scottish independence because it could be an example for Catalonia and other regions of Spain. But second, I think he's right. I mean, there are more probabilities that Scotland becomes independent than Catalonia in the first place because the UK allows a referendum on independence, and there could be another referendum, whereas Spanish legislation, as we have seen in the constitutional structure of Spain, doesn't allow for a secession or independence referendum.
What was behind those remarks by Josep Borrell?
Well, I think it was a realistic assessment of what is going on in the UK, really, and in these negotiations about Brexit. I don't know if there is an intention about Spanish internal politics in these declarations.
Don't look at me. I don't know.
All right, we're going to move on and just take a look at what you have to consider to be a crash landing. The boss of the world's top-selling automaking alliance, plucked by police from his private jet at Tokyo airport at the start of the week. Now Carlos Ghosn is out of a job at Nissan and Mitsubishi, on his way out at Renault, getting 3 bowls of rice a day inside a Tokyo prison. the highest paid CEO in France, was also the highest paid CEO in Japan, and allegedly hid a big portion of his pay from the taxman.
Way beyond feeling sorry, I feel great anger and disappointment. I'm forced to say that we are talking about the dark side of the Ghosn era, which lasted for many years.
Many fascinating facets to this story, starting with that press conference where Hiroto Saikawa, our own Yuka Royer, who's monitoring it, pointed out he never did the thing that you see in Japan where when there's an apology, you bow in contrition. There was little contrition.
There's no contrition from his part, and more alarmingly, I don't know what the exact word to use is, he was also announcing decisions that would be taken by his board that hadn't met yet. You know, the board was the Nissan board, which fired Ghosn, met hours after that press conference, yet he was announcing it all basically as if they didn't even need to have the board meeting. Which, as you've probably seen in France, there's been lots of talk that this was a coup, you know, that this was all sort of set up by Nissan. Interestingly, the French government's not taking that view. I mean, I've spoken to advisors at the French government, and they actually are taking the accusations against Ghosn fairly seriously and are not accusing the Japanese.
Because there's two theories, right? There's the theory that it was this whistleblower has the dirt on a lot of people inside of Nissan, and therefore they decided to throw the boss under the bus. And the theory that, well, maybe this whistleblower is the man you just heard.
Well, the other theory is that Ghosn might have been pushing for a merger of the two companies that went way beyond what the Japanese were willing to accept. They've got a very complicated cross-shareholding, which greatly benefits Renault at the expense of Nissan. So the Japanese have always bristled at it. And interestingly, it was Macron, it was president of France now, as economy minister in 2015, who pushed through that shareholding pact, and that the Japanese have never liked. So the thought that Ghosn might have been trying to, behind the scenes, sort of create a merger of the group that would cement that sort of advantage that Renault has over Nissan, that's one of the theories as to why they moved to push him out.
We're gonna pick up on that theory when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Marc Basset's Paris bureau chief for El País, the Spanish daily newspaper. Christine Okello, sister station Radio France International. And Gregory Viscusi of Bloomberg News, who is telling us about the demise of a man who was at the helm of a company that, of an alliance rather, that sells 10.5 million vehicles a year, number one in the world. Now, never do we peddle in conspiracy theories on The World This Week, but we're always happy to point out fortuitous coincidences. The Financial Times reporting Wednesday that Nissan's board was resisting attempts by Ghosn and Renault to make the alliance with Nissan a permanent merger. Christopher Dickey.
Well, I mean, I think that could be a conspiracy. It certainly seems plausible. One of the things that our correspondent in Tokyo pointed out is that this whole question of masking your salary by charging things off to the company, sometimes in enormous amounts, it goes on quite frequently in Japan. But people might be hauled on the carpet technically for it, but they're not arrested. They're not thrown in jail. They're not eating 3 bowls of rice a day because of it. This is clearly an effort not only to punish Ghosn, but to humiliate him. Now, why would they do that? Is that just a Japanese cultural thing? Or is it, in fact, a shot across the bow of anybody who's trying to arrange something like a merger rather than just an alliance?
Marc Basset?
You know, it reminds me, and excuse me if the comparison is too stretched, of something that happened a few years ago with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was a very prominent politician, a figure in France, a symbol of certain things in France, as Carlos Ghosn is. He was also arrested in a foreign country, and there were also all kinds of theories about why then, etc. So this episode has reminded me in the
I don't know. I covered that. I don't think Carlos Ghosn had exactly the same problems.
No, of course. That's why I said that the comparison is
it's
two completely different.
It's not sex here; it's money. Money is the issue. I think his salary was huge. I mean, last year he earned something like 12 million euros, 4 times the amount of Tokyo's chairman. And I think in Japan, that really sort of raised eyebrows. And the kind of lifestyle he was leading was very brazen, was very brash. There was a
big wedding in Versailles.
The Marie Antoinette themed party. I mean, I would have loved to have been there. Dressed up in a big
I wasn't invited
ball gown.
either.
I wasn't invited.
And back in 2016, there was a shareholders' revolt at Renault
because he earned too much money.
His €7 million salary.
Exactly. So he completely sort of falsified his salary, and his compensation package just didn't go down well with the Japanese culture. So I think he was too.
And also,
brash.
he was an extraordinary CEO in that he did save 2 companies. I mean, when Renault took over Nissan, they were in terrible shape.
It was in 1999.
Yeah, 20 years ago, let's say. And he certainly has done a great job at Renault, but he's probably the job has been done. I think in both countries they've kind of tired of him. Because of the things that you mentioned. That I think they're sort of both sides. I mean, the Japanese certainly are willing to move beyond them, but I think the French are too.
It's absolutely fascinating to see who this man is. Lebanese-born, French-educated, Lebanese, heritage,
Brazilian-born, French-educated.
French-educated. His nickname 7-Eleven because he'd work every day from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Wow.
And
It's more like 9/11 now.
1 week in Japan every month, 1 week in France.
Well, he's got 6 houses. Yeah, Rio, New York, Beirut, Paris, Amsterdam, where the alliance is registered, and Tokyo.
What was the street rep of Carlos Ghosn before this all blew up?
Well, he was like the savior of
they're like comic books about him in Japan. He was a huge hero and he saved Nissan. But as I say, I think people have forgotten that these companies were in trouble. They're not in trouble now, and so I just think that he's. I think at this point, having done the job.
Yeah. And I think people forget, once things have been done, they forget. They have short memories. When things are not going well, they remind you. They're very quick.
And he's clashed with a lot of people.
Yeah. All right, on the hashtag World this week, a lot of reactions. This one, it seems like an excuse to get back at Nissan and Nissan and Mitsubishi into Japanese hands right after Ghosn executed the turnaround. Now, at the Yokohama Nissan plant, opinion divided over the legacy of Carlos Ghosn.
Mr. Ghosn has worked hard to make Nissan into a great company. It's a pity what's happened.
I think Ghosn was a dictator. He was paid way too much. And not paying taxes is not good.
It gets back to what you were saying about your Tokyo correspondent, Christopher Dickey, because the corporate culture in multinational firms, in this case, it's not one firm, it's an alliance between 2 companies, is always something difficult to manage.
Well, yeah, even when this first was announced 20 years ago, I was like, how are they going to do that? How are they going to match the corporate culture of a French company like Renault with the Japanese culture of Nissan? And more to the point, how is a Lebanese heritage Brazilian-born guy going to do it? And he worked miracles. Come on. I mean, he saved both companies, and it worked very well for a long time. But if we're going to make analogies, sometimes stretching a bit, I think it's a little bit like Winston Churchill. He got Britain through the war, and then they voted him out.
They voted him out right away, because they were tired of him.
And I think it sounds like a very bad it's like a Shakespearean tragedy, the hero falls.
But there are other more mundane examples of business people, Jack Welch at GE. I mean, there are other examples of people who, after a certain point, the company just wants to move on.
But people here in this country are suddenly remembering that there were a spate of suicides at Renault, that the conditions, he was known as le cost killer. And people now remembering that. Emmanuel Macron has, when he came to office, blown up the mainstream political parties. He's since stared down the trade unions, but has France's president met his match this time with a leaderless protest movement against rising fuel prices? The Gilets jaunes, yellow vests, reminding us that carbon taxes on diesel and unleaded come on the heels of a decade where spending power has failed to grow for the middle classes in this country.
The only reason they're increasing taxes is to tax people as much as they can. If they'd brought in free bus passes or didn't close the smaller train stations, maybe we wouldn't have reacted this way.
My parents and everyone around me are struggling. I'm taking my driving test. If prices keep going up, I won't be able to cope.
Now, this Yellow Vests movement, Marc Bassetts, it's a chance to remind people that France, one of the world's biggest economies, the median income is last year is 1,710 euros a month net. That means if you earn more than 20,520 euros a year, you're in the top 50% of money earners. It's not much money, especially in the Paris area.
And the pouvoir, what they call here the pouvoir d'achat, the
Spending power.
spending power is a big concept in French politics. It always comes back, you know, and it's the way to measure the happiness of the people. And this issue clearly is an issue of the so-called people. I don't like this word, but against the elites. You know, it's the issue that we've seen in so many countries, in America, in the UK, in Italy, etc., etc. It comes now to France.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that this whole debate sort of pits a divide between, the social, la justice sociale, the need to ensure that people have a decent purchasing power, they have their social needs are met, and yet also creates this other sort of clash that we also need to save the planet. But how do you go about saving the planet and ensuring that people aren't left behind? This is an issue we've been covering on our website at RFI English, looking at how the government has been trying to respond to people's concerns, to better pass this bitter pill, if you like, of accepting the need to transition to a renewable energy society. And so far, it's failing. We're not
and it pits Macron's voters who tend to be urban and don't rely on cars and are interested in ecology with most of the country that still relies on their cars. I mean, we think of France being a country of public transport. I checked. The percentage of people who commute to work alone in their car every day is basically the same in France as is in the U.S.
Wow.
It's not that different.
Now, the biggest blow to date for Macron has been the shock resignation of his most popular cabinet member. Former Environment Minister Nicolas Hulot, a former TV host, reemerged Thursday night for the first time since he quit, and on national television was asked about the carbon tax that was instituted in this country during a political chat show.
I defended it alongside many others, and I take it upon myself, but only if measures are taken to help people to adapt to it.
That's what's missing today.
They've been missing all along. I repeat it, these measures were missing all along.
You're saying that now, but did you say it back then?
I said it at the time. Everyone knows that.
So Nicolas Hulot, Christopher Dickey said, I was in favor of the carbon tax. I defended it. But I also wanted there to be measures so that the little guy doesn't feel the pinch.
Well, that's in fact what one of the little guys on the street was saying. If we were getting free bus passes or it were easier to get rail transport and cheaper to get rail transport, then maybe we could buy this. I think that Greg touched on something very important here that I think many, many people who look at France don't understand, and that is that France is not Paris. France is a much bigger country, and even a lot of people who work in Paris have to drive to work, even though there's a pretty good network of rail out into the sort of medium outer suburbs. People still drive long distances to get into Paris and to get to their jobs. And these kinds of taxes affect them immediately. I would add to that Paris itself, for the people who are coming in, has become more and more difficult to deal with if you're driving a car. Anne Hidalgo, the mayor, has made it extremely difficult and unpleasant to have a car in Paris. She's closed all kinds of highways. There's all kinds of things going on that are huge irritants to people who have to depend on cars.
And I think one thing to keep in mind outside of Paris is that small French towns are dying. I mean, all the local services are closing. They're closing post offices, they're closing hospitals. Little shops are closing. Everything's moving out to shopping centers. So you need your car. Need your car more than ever. Like you can't live in a small town and live alone.
It's like what happened in America. America, of course, is built around the car. I mean, that's the way America's constructed. France was not, but more and more it is. There are more and more big malls, hypermarkets, all these kinds of things.
And fewer shops in the town.
And it's killing the main street.
And then public services, it's a huge issue. I mean, you go into parts of France. There used to be a hospital 10 minutes away. Now the closest hospital is 30, 40 minutes away.
Marc Bassetts, you were in the northern port city of Calais this week.
Yes.
what do they think there of the yellow vests?
Well, I spent some time on Wednesday night with people, with yellow vest people that were blocking and not blocking a road. They were blocking it sometimes and they went away. But what did I learn? I don't know what they want, really. Some of them were against the tax for gasoil, for diesel. Others said we don't want more taxes. And others just directly said we want Macron out. We want him to resign, which is completely unrealistic. And they don't want to have leaders. They don't want to have politicians. Well, I talked with people from far left who had taken part in demonstrations from the far left in the last years or months, but people who had ideas were quite near from the far right.
And that's what scares the president.
Well, but I think
there is no leader.
Well, is that scary or not? I mean, this reminds me so much of in 2011 the Occupy Wall Street movement, where you had no leaders, people were getting together, they were making a big deal, there was Occupy this, Occupy that, all over America, very much like this. And it died, it melted. Why? Because there was no leadership, there was no organization. What happens inevitably there's an enormous amount of infighting, there's no agenda. People decide that they want radically different things and that occupying or putting on yellow vests and stopping traffic, that's going to accomplish it, but it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the whole thing just collapses. And that's what I would predict for this.
And I think also Macron, like previous governments before him, has been almost very contradictory in his approach to, enforcing
Says he's
the
going to
green
make
revolution.
big announcements next Tuesday.
Yeah, he's announcing big announcements next Tuesday. But for years, France has been encouraging people to buy diesel. Diesel was, the safe fossil fuel to buy, and now there's, the major U-turn. Sorry, now we have to sort of change and not use diesel anymore. So people are kind of like, what's going on?
How do you
make up your mind. What do you want?
I'm not so sure, Chris. We'll see what happens. I'm just not sure this thing's going to go away. I think something's going on here. It's
From yellow vests to Le Black Friday, another illustration of U.S. soft power. The rest of the world may not adopt Thanksgiving, but thanks in no small part to the World Wide Web and online promotions, Black Friday sales have become a part of the lexicon the world over, including here in France. Are you surprised?
Including
Mark?
here in France. A friend of mine posted a photo on Facebook from a newspaper in Zambia talking about Black Friday specials. So,
you mentioned that it is a worldwide phenomenon. Dateline South Africa, the Canal Walk Shopping Center, that's in Century City, Cape Town, where this time they gave out tickets to avoid the stampedes of last year. So it was more orderly and more celebratory.
I cut off Mark.
Your thoughts, Christina Okello, on wanton consumerism going global?
Just on the transition from the Yellow Vest protest to Black Friday, I think it's almost ironic that people are complaining about spending a few more extra centimes because they didn't want to pay more money for petrol, for gas, but yet we've been looking at Green Friday also on our website, so we've done the contrast between Black Friday, Green Friday, and some people are saying, well, let's consume less, but yet they don't want to pay more for gas. So there's a bit of also...
let's explain that. Black Friday may be relatively new to France, but already we have a backlash here.
Yes.
A whole host of Green Friday initiatives, including sales on energy-saving appliances, calls to buy local and avoid big carbon footprints. One online petition on the French edition of the Huffington Post by environmentalists denounces the feeding of, quote, Pavlovian consumer reflexes, Marc Basset.
Well,
what does that mean?
There is a long tradition in France of, not against consumerism, but also anti-American, of course. And Black Friday is an American thing that we
buy a
the
lot
French
of blue jeans and we eat a lot of McDonald's hamburgers.
more than anyone, I think.
And it's not even Vendredi Noir.
No.
It's Black Friday.
But I would like the French to, or the Europeans, or the rest of the world to import Thanksgiving. I love Thanksgiving. For me, it's the counterpart of Black Friday, and it's a wonderful.
So you can have Black Friday, but you have to have Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, I want to have. If we have to have Black Friday, please let us have Thanksgiving. Also.
Yeah. If anything, for the turkey, everyone likes a good turkey.
Chris Radicki, what are your thoughts? You're as an American in Paris. Is it like the? Do
Look,
you feel like it's the United States coming to France?
Well, it is, but it's not the worst thing that ever happened to France to have sales. I mean, 30 years ago, in France, sales were very rare. They were weirdly regulated, and they would only be seconds. It's like you'd go in and, oh, that's on sale. Oh, it's broken. Well, that's why it's on sale. And to see this kind of marketing that's developed over the last 30 years in France, it's not the worst thing that ever happened.
I sense you're looking a little bit down on this concept of the Green Friday.
I certainly am. I mean,
Why?
think, well, look, I mean, it's a nice idea, but but as I tweeted, if Anne Hidalgo wants to say, let's make this Green Friday, I'm all in favor of a greener Paris, but I'd like to see a cleaner Paris, okay? It's a very poorly run city now, but we can talk about that another time.
Gregory Viscusi?
I agree. I mean, I'm someone who rides a bicycle everywhere around town, so I'm definitely like, poster boy for green thing. But on the other hand, for people who don't want to ride a bike, the metro system is deteriorating in Paris. I mean, it is. I mean, when I do take the metro, it's much more common in the past to have, trains that stop.
But the Green Friday concept,
the trains don't arrive, and so they've got to get that working before. I'm totally happy to shut Paris off to cars, but there's got to be an alternative.
And the Green Friday concept?
Look, I mean, everything works with gimmicks these days. What do you want to do?
I mean, I was looking at the images beforehand. It just reminds me of Boxing Day in London. I'm from the UK, and it's always like a mad rush. You're trying to find like the latest outfit on sale, and it's sort of strange for me to see those kind of images in France. I've always, I kind of like left the UK because of that reason, because consumerism was everywhere, and I always found the French a bit more quaint, a bit more low key, and go back to your question.
No,
it's
I think
almost like
you just have to walk down any shopping street in France, and you see this is a country that does like to consume as much as any
I
other.
find that a
think
shame.
there's
Because
anything
I need to go back to London or maybe go find another country, because consumerism is.
Well, look, consumerism
everywhere.
is what pushes the economy. Let's not forget, what is Black Friday really about? In fact, it's not about Thanksgiving. It's about Christmas.
Yeah.
It's about going and giving a big boost to sales before Christmas, before you get right up against it. And I think that's a perfect.
And that is one nice thing about Thanksgiving, is that it does at least mean that Christmas shopping doesn't begin until after Thanksgiving. In France, in some places, they start putting up Christmas decorations in late September now. Late September, early October.
Well, listen to
lights are
florists.
Thanksgiving sort of puts a barrier.
Florists have already got Christmas trees all over the place now.
Well,
which also 30 years ago you couldn't find.
Or you might choose the option of doing your shopping on December 23rd. Gregory Viscusi, I want to thank you.
I think we know
Mark
who does that.
Bassett, Christopher Dickey as well. Christina O'Kello, stay with us. Media Watch is next.